about a year ago, we recorded one of our most popular episodes. It was managed versus unmanaged at this same event. It was the CRM Summit in Phoenix. We crammed into this little hotel room in Phoenix, and there were, I don't know, like 6 of us or whatever. It was Neil Benson and Aiden Cascella, and I think Nick Dolman was there, and Seth Bacon, and there was this guy there too who was claiming that his voice was, I don't know, messed up or something, and that he didn't want to participate, which was okay because I didn't have enough microphones now that I think about it. But he was in the room, and after the episode we recorded, we talked for like hours and hours and hours about managed versus unmanaged and kind of his opinion on that, and sort of I got to know him throughout the night, and then we ended up hanging out for days at the conference and stuff, and I just kind of knew like at the conference that Nick Hayduke was going to become an MVP, was going to be part of the family, and we really needed him. He has an amazing amount of experience when it comes to portals, when it comes to dynamics as a whole. So is kind of one of those situations where as soon as you meet somebody, you're like, we need people like that in the community. We need people like that in the family. And man, almost like exactly a year later, here you are, part of the show.
Here I am.
Your voice is okay.
My voice is, I'm still fighting a bit of a cold, but...
Since then?
Yeah. Well, I'm from Canada, so it's just, it's always cold. Yeah.
It's always cold.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the show, Nick.
Well, thanks for having me. It was tough biting my tongue that whole time, listening to a bunch of people talk about they all love the unmanaged solution. But,
correctly, though.
I don't know if we want to get into that today, but
probably not.
It was very entertaining to watch you guys talk about that, and I'm glad we've moved past it now.
Exactly. Well, we're happy to have you obviously today, because today we're talking about a pretty interesting topic. Over the last, I don't know if it's months now or weeks at this point, I guess if we count Azure, Microsoft has been switching into this consumption-based licensing for their cloud services. We've been with Dynamics 365 at least, and also with Office 365, we've been kind of used to the idea of paying on a per user per month basis and having pretty much an unlimited access to the functionality. But Microsoft has been noticing that in a lot of cases, there are organizations that perhaps might not even be the biggest organizations, but they are using the most out of the platform. Right? They're using the bejesus out of the platform. So imagine if, when it came to power or electricity, every house paid the same, a flat rate, and you were kind of subsidizing your neighbor across the street who decided to start a welding shop, out of their backyard or something like that, and you were paying for their electricity, right? It's not cool. So what Microsoft decided to do is start moving away from the per user per month approach and start charging on a consumption basis. And 2 things were kind of right out of the bag announced. One was portals was going to move into a consumption-based, kind of licensing. And I've seen, I don't even want to say mixed reviews. I think it's been pretty negative right off the back. There've been a few articles on LinkedIn that I've read where people are very unhappy about the changes that have been announced. So I'm happy, Nick, you're here to talk about that, of course. And the second thing that was announced was the API limits that Microsoft will be enforcing starting in 2020 essentially for users in Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. And Gustav Westerlund wrote a really, really good blog article about essentially not only the limits and what was coming, but also the costs that were being announced, and also how a regular customer, will be affected by them. And you provided an example of one of your customers on that. So when I knew that you were coming to the CRM Summit, and you, Nick, were coming to the CRM Summit, I felt that this was the perfect opportunity to get together and talk about this topic. I know that In the past, we haven't done a whole lot of super technical episodes like this, where we are just digging in and talking about something that might affect essentially every single organization out there that is using Dynamics 365. So this could be a good one for people that were looking for something like that. So why don't we talk about that article that you wrote, Gustav, to start talking about that. So again, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for writing the article.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people benefited from that. I've provided it to prospects and stuff, people that I'm working with, and they're talking about, licensing, for example, because people got excited about the licensing changes in terms of the $10 per user per month now for Power Apps and stuff like that. But the other side is also that, hey, there's these API limits that are coming too. So you have to be mindful about some of the changes, the positive and the negative, potentially negative changes. And why don't you talk about what you wrote?
Yeah, but I think the first thing about in that article is that it's a bit outdated now because Microsoft had come out with some new stuff regarding that. So there's the link to the Microsoft site on that. You should.
Well, let's talk about first the announcement. Like, what did they announce?
So
originally?
what they did announce was that they had they're going to start enforcing. Not actually enforcing, but start measuring and connecting the API requests to the users. So, for instance, for a normal sales app user, you will get 20,000 API requests per day, per 24 hours.
What does that mean? So you're talking about a regular user. So I'm a salesperson. I'm just creating accounts, contacts, opportunities, activities. What's an API request? What does that mean?
Oh, from the start, when I wrote that article, we believed that also meant like all the calls that would going against the platform, including like when you were using the UI. We've got that cleared up, and does not mean that. So it would actually mean if you have something that's coming from the outside, not internal calls from the application, and we can go into deeper into that exactly what is an internal call, but so calls going in as your user to the application.
Right. So one of the things I think it was Juka who wrote this article, and he said that he counted the API calls of just loading like the out of the box contact entity, and it was like 18 or something like that, or 24.
I think it was Scott Duro that did it.
Or Scott Duro. It was somebody. It was one of the MVPs that went and counted one by one how many they were, and there were like a couple dozen of them. So by that account, it was something like if you open like 20 contacts a day, you would hit your limit. It was like a very low number, like a very doable number. Like in a lot of cases, obviously, users don't sit there just opening 20 contacts. I get that. But it was a doable number. So the original idea was like, don't worry, this won't affect 95% of companies. But then when that article came out and the results were sort of like I remember reading it and I'm like, 95%, like this is very doable. Like I feel like this would hit most of my customers. But now that we have more clarity, as you mentioned, that internal use of just the application won't count, then I feel that yes, this will only affect maybe 99%, maybe it won't affect 99%. Like I think 95 is a conservative estimate.
Yeah. Then I think that's probably true, but because I think the initial alarm that we saw was based on the maybe misinterpretations of that article that they released, and I think that's maybe one of the critiques that I had in my article. It was that the communication that they were sending out it wasn't clear enough. That they need to be very clear on what they're sending out, especially in these types of when they're talking about these types of things, because it affects a lot of customers and partners, of course. So I think that's important. And people and the buzz that goes around this can become very large, and people start getting afraid, and they don't know what to do, and if they should invest or divest in technology, and that can become very damaging to Microsoft and to partners, of course. So that's why I think it's very important to think about the communication in that. So I think that's something they should think about.
All right. What else did they announce?
So what happened then after in the initial announcement was that there would when you have normal users that you pay for, they're called licensed users. Then there's like non-licensed users. And the initial announcement was that non-licensed users will not get any assigned API requests at all. But then they changed that and they said that, okay, so the non-licensed users and per instance will get 100,000 API requests per 24 hours. So they said that, okay, fine, there's like a baseline of that. And then if you need more than that, then you can buy. We will be selling a special license where you can buy 10,000 additional API requests per.
Kind of like packages of 10,000 on top of that.
Yeah.
But can you give me examples of non-licensed users versus licensed users? Like where would you use this thing?
Yeah, so normal user is of course like
A salesperson, whatever.
Yeah,
somebody logging in.
Selling it. Yeah. Normal people. And it can also be team members, of course, team member licenses. They're normal users. However, the non-licensed users are typically three types of users. What you have is that you have application users. These are what Microsoft typically recommends you to use when you integrate with other systems.
Yep.
Yeah. They are you create them in Azure Active Directory. They're a bit technical, so I won't go into those details. You can look them up if you want to.
Yeah, they're also kind of categorized as non-interactive users, but they call them application users. And the reason they call them application users is because they don't count towards your 5 non-interactive user limit that you have per instance in Dynamics 365.
I think that there's actually a difference because a non-interactive users is something different, as far as I've understood anyway. So there's actually something called a non-interactive users as well.
Yes.
If I've understood this correctly, because I've never actually used the non-interactive users, but non-interactive users is a normal user, like for instance a user called Gustav Westerlund.
Yes.
But then you can go in and set that as a non-interactive user by switching by a switch on that user, which then you can. By after that, you cannot log in as using the UI on that, but only using the API.
No, so the way it works is essentially you create a user and you don't give him a license. You make him it's like an administrative user essentially.
Yep.
So they don't have a license, but they can still, you can still use those credentials to process integrations and stuff.
Okay,
you can have up to 5 of those.
Okay, so it's more or less the same thing. Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing. But what Microsoft is saying is they call them application users, so it doesn't count towards your limit of 5 non-interactive users. So it's a user that doesn't have a Dynamics license. You can use to integrating with apps. That's what they're called, application users. Non-interactives are used for integrations with data, like data integrations.
Yeah, because application users, you can have more than 5.
Correct.
Yeah.
In one case, you have an actual Azure AD user being created.
Yes.
And then the other case, you're creating apps in Azure AD.
Correct.
Yeah. And then there's admin users, which is non-licensed
administrative users. Yeah.
So those are the 3 non-licensed users. So if something's if you're doing something with these users, then these API requests go against that 100,000 call. Those 100,000 requests per year.
So if you're using a non-interactive user for data integrations, then it's 100,000.
Yeah. But it's,
per user.
Yeah,
so,
but if you have like 3 of those, I mean, they all go against that total of 100,000. So
right.
Yeah. So then you need to look at that, right?
Right. So, it's 100,000 per user. So you can use 5 non-interactive.
No.
So it's just
per
100
tenant.
Per tenant, not
no,
even
per instance.
Or is it per instance?
I think it's per instance. Yeah. So if you have a production instance, that's 100,000 for that, and 100,000 for UAT.
So if you have an integration and you're synchronizing more than 100,000 records, you may be in trouble.
No.
Okay.
Because if you batch your calls, so if you like send execute multiple, for instance, and
right.
you do send 10 updates in one,
right.
then you can do a million per 24 hours.
Yeah, I mean, not a whole lot of companies are out there sending 100,000 records a night, right? But there are companies out there doing that. So
of course.
Yeah, I'm just making sure.
And then I think this also goes back to something else, because in my initial thought that I had in the article, that I was calling it the good, the bad, and the ugly of this, it was that the good thing about this was that I thought, anyway, was that that they were going to relax the throttling that they announced in the spring, but they're not going to do that, as far as I've seen it now anyway. So the throttling that's there, there's 3 types of throttling, then they're still going to be there. and not being.
So
relaxed.
what were you expecting to change? Like, what were you expecting from today? We have this. I was hoping we got that.
Yeah, I was hoping that for large organizations, you were. I mean, what happens in larger? I have a customer. They use about 1 million calls a day. So what I was hoping is that they would be able to throw money at the throttles, and they can get them more relaxed. So we don't have to have those tight throttles if we just pay money to Microsoft somehow, which is hard to do currently. There's no way to pay for that.
Right.
Yeah. So we're still stuck with those throttles, right? So I was hoping that this would be that way to be able to pay for getting rid of some of those throttles for large organizations. Because I mean the problem is, like, let's say you start with a small, you're an organization, you start small and you just use sales, and then you expand into customer service and into other things, and you start integrating with one system, and then you integrate like with 2 or 3 other systems, and you integrate with 10 other systems. Of course, your amount of API calls is going to go up with that. That's
Right.
only natural, but you don't get allocated anymore. You only get like 100,000 from the start, right?
Right.
So I think it's not really. It doesn't scale to enterprise level, from my perspective. It's like you have a 20 user organization, and then you have a 50,000 user organization. They all get 100,000 calls.
Yeah, true. But I mean, I feel that what Microsoft is saying is they're not putting a cap on it, right? They're just saying it's included, but then you can pay more and get more, right?
Yeah. But if you have but I mean, my point is that if you pay for a 50,000 user organization, you should.
I get that. You should get more. I get that. I agree with that. I mean, if you have 10 users, why do you get 5 non-interactive users? And if I have 10,000, I also get not 5 non-interactive users. Like, I should get more. Like, it should be, a ratio of some kind. I get that. But at the same time, I'm like, we're not. It's not like they're telling us like you get 100,000 and that's it. Like, you cannot buy more. Like, you can always pay for more. But anyway. So
but I think that the problem here is actually that the throttling is going to be the limiting factor here. That's the thing that's going to probably stop you a lot from doing things to the platform, because it's going to hinder you in a lot of sense for actually communicating with the platform. At some point, anyway, I think there's a way of going around that with using more and more users, of course. You can create as many application users as you want, and you can figure the rest out yourself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you have 50,000 users, you'll be on your own dedicated scale group on the cloud, and like they'll probably give you whatever calls you want and all of that. I mean, it's, from what I understand, the biggest like CRM Online, I guess tenant has 150,000 users. Mm. I'm pretty sure they're not gonna be limited to 100,000 API calls. I mean, at that point, it's just like unlimited, like just whatever. You can have anything. But it is interesting that you're going to be. They're not scaling up based on the number of users. At least for most organizations, they're not. Yeah. What else should we be concerned about?
I think when you talked about this, you said it's going to be they're going to start working. It's going to be affected in the 1st of October 2020. What I heard initially anyway was that it's going to effect for new customers as of 1st of October this year, but for existing customers in 1st of October 2020.
Yeah, that's what I meant. So for people listening to this that already have Dynamics, it's not like starting next week you're gonna get a bigger bill. Like it's not gonna affect current customers until next year.
Yeah, and it's not. And then one of the sort of alarm.
Depending on when you're listening to this, you could be listening to this in 2021.
Of course, yeah.
Then it's too late.
Yeah. But then another thing that they're also saying is that it's not going to be a breaking stop. It's just like the current if you exceed the some other limits that's in the platform, you're going to get a lot of Microsoft's going to nag you a lot about it, and you have to pay, and you have to. You're going to get some problems with that, and the same thing goes with this. They're not going to stop your integrations. And I think that also comes back to another issue, because I mean, how is that in practice going to work? If you, for instance, have a large integration, you have a refresh of data from, let's say, you once in a year you do an import of some kind that does like a 10 million calls during one day, and then
people buy like lists of customers, like 1 million doctors or whatever, and like they import them. Like that's obviously going to be affected as well. And I do want to talk about also customers that might be listening to this, or maybe solution architects, functional consultants, etc., that may be listening to this and they are like, okay, so we have a bunch of customers. What do I do to prepare for this? And I want to talk about recommendations. But is there anything else that you want to mention before we talk about portal consumption changes? Because I want to talk about that and then talk about recommendations for those customers, again, that are right now thinking about it. And it's like, what can I do to prepare for this? Like, it's not enough to just be like, I wonder if I'll be affected. I'm going to wait and see. There are things you can do to kind of prepare for it.
Well, I'd start by going into the Power Platform Admin Center and have a look at what's going on right now. Microsoft are saying that they're going to extend that so you can see better what's going on a more granular level, but you can still get quite a lot of information right now, seeing who's doing what kind of API calls.
Yeah, successful calls, failed. There's some information in there for sure.
And you can see like, this user is doing quite a lot of calls.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. And you, Nick, you mentioned something about, you saw a company that was, kind of small, but they were, kind of the poster child for, creating a licensing model like this, right?
Yeah, for sure. So that would be an organization that I've seen that's probably in single-digit number of users, and they've got a significant portal and then significant processes running in the background that are, I think that's maybe in that 5% that Microsoft is trying to target with this.
Exactly. So you have a gazillion API calls going on, and you have a handful of users, right?
Yep.
So that is those are the welding shops in the backyard kind of shops. But again, we talked about the fact that consumption-based approach also hit portals. So let's talk about that. What was portal licensing until the changes took place? Let's talk about that first.
So until the changes took place, you paid per instance. And if you had at least 10 enterprise level licenses, user licenses, you get one single portal license for free, and then you had to pay for each instance after that, about $500 US. So if you're following proper ALM procedures, hopefully you'd have a dev, a test, and a prod. So that's 3 instances. You get one for free. So most organizations would be in $1,000 a month for your portal licensing. It didn't matter. Well, I shouldn't say. There in theory was a limit on the number of page views.
It was 500,000, right, a month or something.
I forget what it was. It didn't really matter because
it was huge.
It was huge, and we never got any sort of statistics on that. We wouldn't know. We wouldn't know if you went over anyways. I don't know if even Microsoft really was paying attention to that.
It was sort of like, I wish we had 1 million.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like we would gladly pay more, if we had that traffic. Yeah.
But even that, I see when I first heard about the changes for the API limits, they did use the word limits, and people are starting to freak out. I'm not going to be able to do things. But the more that I see what they're trying to do, the more I talk with Microsoft. It's about fair use as opposed to limits. So their intention is that most people, this doesn't matter to them. They don't want the sales conversation to be, well, you're going to buy these licenses and then you're going to buy these extra. They don't want people to have those conversations, but at the same time they do have to protect themselves for the extreme cases. So to me, it's less. It's not so much a consumption-based model, and it's more about just. If this had been there from the beginning, it's in that fine print that no one ever reads, that this is how many things you get, and then the 5% have to have that more uncomfortable conversation probably after the fact. But because it didn't exist before and they're introducing it now, it's a big deal. But from the conversations I've had, the hope is that this isn't a big deal at all, except for a very small handful of customers who in probably a lot of cases are going to be happy to, not that they're going to be happy to pay more money, But if there's another level of service that they can get from this, sometimes they might be okay paying that extra money.
Yeah. So we talked about the previous licensing model of portals. What's the new one?
So the new one is you essentially pay. There's essentially three types of users. So if your users are unauthenticated, so if they're anonymous users, you pay per page view. And if your users are authenticated, then you're either paying, if they're internal users, then you're just paying as if they are a regular per app plan, or whatever the plan is that you want to buy for them. If they're external authenticated users, you pay per login. Now, a login, it's not every time they click the login button. That doesn't count. Any logins within a 24-hour period are counted as a single login. But the packages start at, for 100 logins, you're looking at $200 a month. So that's where there was some people who were less than excited about this new model. If you look at $200 for 100 logins, you're $2 a login. There was comments in my session today saying, if you're going to log in and submit a case, and maybe you're, probably at least on average to get a case completed, someone's logging in 2 or 3 times. Now you're paying $6 for a case, and that's pretty pricey. So thankfully, the Microsoft did take the feedback on that, and they did introduce a couple more pricing levels. So you can buy 1,000 logins for at different prices. So you can buy them where it's 1,000 logins for $1,000, and then I believe you can get 5,000 logins for $3,500 or something like. It gets you down to about 80 cents a login, I think. So. It's still not necessarily where people want it to be. It's certainly a very different model than what it was before, where you could just pay whatever you paid your $500 and it didn't matter.
Do you think these changes open the door for a company like ADX Studio to resurface?
I mean, I think there is. If you look at some of the competition, I think that these changes haven't been around that long, and there's some strong marketing material talking about how you don't have to worry about this. For me, one of the biggest challenges with this new pricing model is we really don't have any idea how many logins you would have in a day or over a 24-hour period.
But I think your approach of how many logins does it take to resolve a case is smart. Like, I mean, if I think about the way with the companies that I have to log in somewhere to open a case, like Microsoft, like when I open a case with Dynamics, like when have you guys ever opened a case and you log in once and it was done? Like that never happened. So if I have to log in twice or 3 times or 4 times, then I have to start thinking about like, well, okay, so at the very best, that's going to be $3, $4, $5, whatever per case. Right, and if I resolve on average 1,000, 2,000 cases a month, that's $8,000, $9,000. Like, it starts getting expensive.
Yep.
Really, it's simple math. Like, it's not that complicated, right? So then, when a company comes out and says, "Look, we'll just bill you a portal and you pay us $1,000 a month, and it's unlimited everything."
So the difference there is that because those will be considered internal requests, then you don't have to worry about the API limits.
Correct.
So those other portal providers will be subject to those, because those would be considered internal request or external requests.
Would those be then like app users then, if we're using a portal, or would that be like non-interact? Like is it
the portal's using app users?
Yeah, so it would be 100,000 calls. Would that be in the 100,000 calls?
But Microsoft, that's what we're talking about, internal calls.
Yeah.
The Microsoft have defined that those if portals or Forms Pro or other Microsoft services communicate with Dynamics or the CDS, that's an internal call. How they actually define that's under the cover, so we don't know. But they define that as internal calls. And
because that was going to be my next question. Like, when is somebody going to just come up and go, do Forms Pro for ticket submissions?
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
But then they would be subject. Those would be external calls.
Those would be external calls, right? So.
Yeah.
For Forms Pro?
No, but if someone else came up with a different...
No. I'm just saying, like, using Forms Pro for that kind of thing.
Oh, I see, yeah.
So then it would be internal.
Yeah, but you can create... Of course, you can like have a... It's rather easy to just have a Forms Pro form that you can create a case from, right? So it's how that flow that then takes that data and creates a case. That's simple.
Okay, so what about the anonymous stuff? How's that priced out?
I believe it's $100 for 100,000 page views for a month. So everything is
That's
you have
like
to
the
kind of,
contact us page, type of style, visits, right? Like you go to a portal, you submit something, submit an idea, submit a contact us request, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, a lot of times we're seeing people expose their knowledge base sometimes to anonymous users. So that would be one place where you'd see that. A lot of most portals, most of the experience is authenticated. So I think if your portal is getting 100,000 anonymous page views, most people would be very happy to pay $100 for that. So I don't think there's too much concern about that side of things.
Yeah.
And Nick, I got this question. I was in your session today as well, and I got this question like from a customer, but that they were thinking about having their own authentication that instead of using the Microsoft one, and how just to sort of like bypass the Microsoft authentication. So what do you think about that?
I think the challenge with that is if you're not using the authentication that the portal gives you, you're probably not using a lot of the capability. Like, what's the point of even using a portal at that point? Put it elsewhere. I mean, of course, you are then maybe leveraging internal calls, but you're losing any sort of web roles, entity permissions, anything like that if you're not using the portal authentication. So at that point, you probably should just do a portal in a different way.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah.
Interesting. Man, I can't wait to see where this stuff goes. It's by far my least favorite topic, like licensing and licensing changes and how much is stuff going to be. Like, that's just my least favorite stuff. I like to see innovation. I like to see, where the product's going. I thought that the conversation we had today was very interesting in terms of where Microsoft is going with the Power Platform, and you talked about kind of giving us freedom to create and innovate and think outside the box, and how essentially they want to enable us to have the freedom to do whatever we want, right? Like whatever solution we can envision, anything we want to create, not be kind of limited by the options of what this thing can do, right? And be like, well, that's the way it works. That's how you have to do it because that's the way it works. They've been focused on allowing us to do more and more innovation, which is pretty cool. But at the same time, the truth is a lot of organizations out there have developed their solutions in a way, and they're looking at, some of these limits being implemented, some of these things changing. What can they do to prepare? So organizations that have, for example, extensive code, and perhaps it was written by, developers who might not be your expert developers that didn't really implement something that is the most optimized code out there. Are they at risk of falling into that 5% of organizations that are going to be killed? Perhaps because you use an example of one of your customers that is perhaps looking at $50,000 a year extra on just API calls. And I'm not saying every company will do that, but if you didn't do a really good job implementing Dynamics and with your code and the way you approach the architecture of it, could you be paying because you didn't, do a good job implementing?
I think it's a bit maybe a bit harsh to say that you didn't do a good job. There's always reasons why things look the way they look. Yeah,
sure.
So in that case, what happened was that they had a very complex integration, which imports a lot of orders more or less from other systems using files, and this was upgraded from when we went from on-prem to online. We upgraded this entire code structure. It was lots and lots of code. So I think it's maybe 10,000 lines of code. So the problem with that is like refactoring that entire thing to be more. What we need to do in that case is make it more batch oriented. Nobody bothered to do that when it was on-prem because there was no point in it. Why would they? It was fast enough. But when moving online, of course the correct thing to do would be to like rip it all apart, like, and redo it. But going to management and asking for that budget, saying we'll just take we'll have function A, we'll spend a ton of money, and then we'll have function A, but better.
But optimized.
Yes,
Yeah.
optimized, and it'll be more modern. And then you ask management for that, and then say, or you can put your money over here, and you get lots of other cool functions. What do you want to do? And there's almost no management that's not really as tech savvy that actually will put the money into that, like refactoring stuff.
That's a lot of money just to make Microsoft
It's a tough
happy
call.
for.
Yeah,
when it didn't cost you
So
anything.
it's really
call.
it's a really tough call. It's a really tough ask for people that are product owners to go to their management and ask for money to do that. So I think that's one of the problems that we have here. So I think many customers are stuck there. I think many of the reasons that you see code that might be integrating inefficiently is that you have developers that might be really good developers, but they might not be really good with Dynamics. So they come from an outside perspective, and they see Dynamics as a black box, and they look at the SDK and they say, yeah, good. I can read data like doing this, and I can create data doing this, and I can update data doing this. And they don't realize that there's a cost, and they should be batching data. They should be using retrieve multiples, or doing like getting lists of data instead of getting single items, and stuff like that. This is typically what we've been noticing, what we've been helping other experts, and when we're looking at what they have been doing, it's like, oh, why are you doing just single gets here? You should be like, stop doing, wait and get 100 each every time. Instead, oh, why? Why is that important? Because of X, Y, Z, right? So I think that's one of the problems that we typically see. And I think another way, so batching, to just say it very clearly, try to be better with batching, execute multiples to do that. There's tools that do this, that have this built in, so you can use those. I don't want to do sponsorships here, so I won't mention anyone. And then of course another way to do this is using a data export service that you have with Dynamics. So you can start set up an Azure SQL database, export the data to the Azure SQL database, and then start reading from that database, and you're doing the reads from that database instead, because that will be faster, and that won't cost you money, or cost you requests anyway. That will cost you from Azure though, but that's a lot cheaper.
Definitely. What about on the portal side? Is there anything we can do to prepare for some of these changes for people that already have those portals that they're paying, $1,000 for, like you mentioned, a month?
Yeah, they'll be kind of grandfathered in as part of until their contract ends, and then they'll be moving to the new model. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I mentioned in my session today is that the Power Apps portals, it's not for everyone. So there's other options out there. Even if you talk to the folks at Microsoft, they're going to say that it has its benefits, but in some cases maybe it's just not the right play. If you have millions of logins or hundreds of thousands of logins, maybe that just isn't the right platform. I think a lot of people are going to continue advocating that maybe there needs to be some tweaks, but all we can really work with is what we know today. So,
wow, interesting. All right, guys. Anything else you want to add, Gustav?
Well, I think that when it comes to I think you need to study really hard what internal calls are defined as. I think it really comes down to that as well, especially if you have an application that's doing a lot of things. I think, for instance, in plugins, it will come down to nitty gritty in that. If you have plugins that's actually using a call using, for instance, the web API or the old SOAP endpoint, that might actually be defined as an external call. But if it's using the context, that will be an internal call. So it depends on how you're actually using the I think that might be a difference in that. I'm not totally certain.
Yeah, I know for whether it was kind of web resources or even the new PCF controls, you have to kind of use the service that they give you as opposed to kind of creating your own one.
Yeah.
And that's again, it's kind of magic as to how they know whether it's internal or not. But that's kind of the direction we were given, is that you got to kind of use the things that we give you, and that's part of how they know that it's internal.
Yeah, and the same goes with Flow. That in Flow, for instance, you have to, if you trigger things and use like the current connector, the current setting for current environment in Flow, that will be counted as internal. But if you do any scheduled flow, for instance, that will not be counted as internal.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Schedule flows.
Yeah. So, but I mean, you'll still have a lot of flows, and you'll still have a lot of calls. So you probably won't be a problem for you anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
All right. Cool. Well, I'm sure people listening to this will have more questions. So, what's the best way to reach you guys? Start with you, Nick.
Probably on LinkedIn. Just look me up. There's, I think, one other Nicholas Hayduk, also from Canada in the world. So,
whoa.
I think he's a lawyer. I think
Imposter.
he's a lawyer. But yeah, look me up on LinkedIn or Twitter, engineered code or engineered_code. You can hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn or yeah.
Awesome. Congrats on the MVP award again, man.
Thank you very much.
Well deserved. Gustav, how about you?
I have a new blog. I changed the domain for that. I moved it from Blogspot. So now I'm on powerplatform.se. So
Nice.
That's a great domain.
it is a great domain. I know. I agree. I wonder when Microsoft will trying to buy that for me.
That's awesome. I'll drop the links below on the notes. And thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode of the CRM MVP podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever you get your podcast, Apple, Google Play, whatever it is. I use Overcast. I don't know what you guys use. What do you have an app, a preferred app, by the way? Just plug it in.
I use Acast.
Acast. I don't even know what that is. How about you?
I'm Android, so I use Podcast Addict.
Podcast Addict. There you go. Yeah. Plenty of options, but whatever they are, the CRM MVP podcast is available everywhere. So make sure you subscribe. And if you have a question for these guys, you want to send it directly to me, I'll forward it to them. info@crmmvppodcast.com. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you guys for joining me.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Gus.
Thank you.